Over the weekend, there was an estimated 7 million people who participated in protests in cities across the United States. The No Kings protest has been called one of the biggest gatherings that have happened. We've seen comparisons of the number of people who were on the lawn for Trump's inauguration versus this. A lot of comparisons have been made and said that this is one of the biggest protests that has ever occurred. Lucas, there have been things that have been fostered by the State Department in various countries under the term color revolution. Do you think anything like that might be going on here? Or does this seem like a very genuine, natural uprising against the authoritarian regime of the Trump administration?
I don't think those two possibilities are mutually exclusive. So color revolutions, I do think we see a lot of the hallmarks of color revolutions, and the State Department likes to find uh, existing reasons or problems that exist within countries and tries to foment them. Um, so I worry when I look at what's going on here that because we've seen the wall between the expectation of the limitations of the federal government with regards to what's allowed within the United States and what used to be allowed outside of the United States, because we've seen that to really begin to uh, because it is much less as to what it used to be. We used to have a different class for American citizens, different expectations for American citizens. I have to assume that this is also true with regards to uh, the State Department, the blob's use of non-government organizations. Uh,
Well,
in
that
in
criticism that criticism that's been leveled at USAID and some of the other departments that Doge went after, those are all shut down ostensibly. Their funding's been removed. The government is shut down. So if this is being coordinated in such a fashion, and I personally don't think that. I'm dubious of that. So as far as my position on this looks to me like there is some genuine disdain for what's happening here. I've been seeing it throughout a variety of different social medias that I've had a chance to look at, and what I've been seeing as I've had a chance to travel throughout the country over the summer. So I'm not surprised to see the amount of protest that's happening here because this was in its early stages in the early part of the summer. So as far as the coordination of it, if all this stuff is shut down and the government is shut down, then all of this would have to have either been paid for ahead of time when all of that was still in place, or the momentum of those organizations continues without the funding. So if there were criticisms that some astroturfing was happening, people were being paid to be in certain places, that some of the protests were not genuine and that there were paid protesters, it seems like the funding and all of that stuff has been cut off. Does it still take a while for that to drain out? We might be seeing the last gasps of that.
Sure. The way that the funding works through, especially USAID and the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, is that they are given, tranches of money, and then they disperse that through grants, and they give massive grants to dissident groups in various countries around the world, and they maintain links with those groups, these both NGOs and also smaller, more dissident groups, things that are going to have uh, uh, not as much structure. So, uh, understanding that aspect, and you said that Doge shut USAID and NED down. It did not.
Whoa!
USAID
Go
and
back to that
NED.
because it was my understanding that those did that. That was one of the only things it accomplished. So, tell me a bit more about that. As it was at least reported that this was one of the prime targets of Doge, and that had occurred. You're saying that they were unsuccessful in shutting down USAID?
Yeah, so USAID and NED were part of a reformation of how, especially the CIA worked, and we have to understand that the CIA is the covert, both a analyst intelligence agency, but also a covert operations organization that ostensibly was designed to answer to the president of the United States, um, but more so answers to the State Department. And if the president can control the State Department, then they can control the CIA. But after the Church Committee in 1979, when the when the legislative branch began to seek more oversight of what the CIA was up to, their answer in order to obfuscate what they were up to was to create these cutouts, the USAID and EDD, among others. But these are the largest, and these are the ones that are targeted towards fomenting dissent in other countries around the world and working with the United States State Department to target regimes that are unfriendly or not working well with the United States, and then to find people who are have some measure of support within the country, and to try to find a path for them to take power in these various countries. So after the Doge Committee shut off the funding or exposed the funding that was being directed to USAID and NED, they were only able to do that for a short amount of time. There was a lot of pushback to that, and so those organizations opened back up directly under the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So Marco Rubio is in control of USAID and NED funding now. And
Rubio is continuing, because I would have thought that he also would not have any love for these organizations and wouldn't have kept them going, but he reauthorized the funding and kicked them right back into gear.
I mean, think about Marco Rubio's biography. He's a Cuban American who grew up in Miami. He supports Florida. He supports Israel. He is very aligned with the idea that there are governments in other nations of the world that do not represent the will of the people who live under their jurisdiction, and that the United States needs to do what they can to help the people of those areas overthrow that government. And Marco Rubio, we know, has fully supported the United States coup attempts in Venezuela and Colombia, with regards to in Venezuela, Juan Guaido and Maria Machado. We can assume that the United States had some sort of background effect on the selection of Maria Machado as the Nobel Peace Prize winner, because she is the person the United States has been trying most recently after the failed coup attempt with regards to Juan Guaido in Trump's first administration. She has been the most recent puppet that the United States has tried to use on Venezuela. And we also know that the United States, like the rhetoric from Donald Trump and also the actions of the War Department, the movement of sailors and ships to that locale, this is something that the United States still is fully engaged in. And despite Trump's promise to or desire to get the United States out of foreign wars, wars are one thing. Maybe he's trying to do that, but I don't know if he draws the line at intelligence operations and the likes of influence that the State Department uses through NED and USAID. So let's go back to this dissipation of the distinction between the United States and other countries of the world. One, we know that the United States uses these. This is their playbook in other countries of the world. We also know, going back to what we've learned in the wake of the Biden administration and the censorship the censorship regime with regards to our social media posts, the erosion of also of the rights of American citizens. I'm thinking about Obama and Obama's use of the military against American citizens abroad I believe it was in the UAE. In Trump's use of the military against people, the boats on the northern coast of Venezuela, and a declaration that these are drug traffickers or whatever it may be, there's still a great erosion in the due process of law that we have expected in the past. So I think that we are seeing broader trends that say, the prohibition that the antics of the State Department are not going to be used upon the people of the United States. We should not have that expectation, and we should be very wary and begin to understand how the United States uses dissident groups and to destabilize democracies across the world. And I think if we begin to look into that, then there's also this narrative of democracy. So the United States intentionally uses this catchword democracy in order to gain control of other countries around the world. And so listen for politicians who are talking about democracy, and remind yourselves that we live in a democratic republic, and that the
Constitutional republic,
a constitutional
right?
republic. And yeah, I mean, a constitution just means that there was a contract between the living and the dead. And our forefathers, the framers, the founders and the framers of the United States, wrote down a document that we believe in and that we accept the rules of. And
But the
you know,
republic being the important part here is that it's more representational and that it's not direct. I think that the indirectness of how U.S. government was originally intended to be set up, and some of that has been eroded with the direct election of senators and some other things that have changed over a bit of time. One might wonder if we're still living in a republic as it's canonically classified, but yeah, I mean, that's at least supposed to be what we're living under.
I mean, even if we go to the to the the no kings, the complaint of the most recent protest that Trump is acting with too much authority, that he is setting himself up as an autocrat, that he's authoritarian, et cetera, et cetera. To go back again to that conversation at the writing of the Constitution, the framers of the Constitution had a debate about whether how a government without a king was to look, and they decided that they would have a king for 4 years. And
So is that a
and
phrase that was repeated frequently during the framing of the Constitution, like a king for 4 years? If someone were to go look at that, is that like a phrase we see repeated, or is that just kind of riffing off the cuff?
that's ripping off the cuff. I would have to go back, but I do know that there was a deal of pain about whether what we're going to call we call it now the president, but that's not what's written in the Constitution. It's the executive. He's referred to as the executive, or that position is referred to as the executive. But when we also begin to look at the autonomy of the president, I'm thinking here about Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon. In the wake of Trump's first administration, they were subpoenaed to give testimony to Congress, and we used to have, again, ideas not just of there being a notion of privacy between the president and his advisors, or the executive and his advisors, but this was also something that was more broadly understood in a legal sense. If you were seeking legal advice from an attorney, then you have an attorney-client privilege, and the conversations that you have are private to you. The legislative branch did not honor that long history, and threw Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon both in jail for not sharing their conversations with Donald Trump. So I think we need to both understand that context and the actions of Donald Trump, and also the the lies that were told by the intelligence community at the request of Barack Obama at the end of Barack Obama's presidency, when he was covering his tracks for the collusion that the administration engaged in with the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign. So you know, the no kings protesters, I don't think are bringing to bear the entirety of that context. And I do understand their concerns with regards to the use of federal agents, the ICE agents, and also the national militias or the state militias, the National Guard, the supposed National Guard. Um, the state militias, and how they're to be used. I fully support um, Americans going back to check the federal government's assumption of the national powers of the states, and especially their national militaries. But I worry that the depth of complexity in what is happening with Donald Trump is being is being washed away, is being shadowed. And when I think about how that happens and how the United States State Department works in other countries, I think that we're fools if we don't believe that it's happening here, especially when we see something like No Kings.
And one of the reasons you're saying that is because it looks too spontaneous, it looks too large, it looks too coordinated to not have some agents acting to bring this together. That if it were more autonomous and more genuine grassroots kind of protest against the government, it wouldn't look this way. That it has too much of the fingerprints of what the color revolutions look like.
The color revolutions are the color revolutions are something that the State Department has perfected through time. If you go back to some of their earlier attempts, that you go back and look at the CIA's actions with regards to Syria. At first they were trying very earnestly to go out and speak and to give calls to action to the dissidents to Mossadegh. It was General Schwarzkopf who told Kermit Roosevelt, you're going about this the wrong way. What you need to be doing here is paying Mossadegh supporters to go, or pay people to go support Mossadegh and to be violent and to leave messes. I don't think the violence was necessarily fights, but to ratchet up the emotion with regards. That worked in some ways, but with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had a real morphing of how these operations were run, and this is whenever we get the focus on democracy. This is why the State Department focuses on dissident groups. We find the Uyghurs in China, and the Kurds in Iraq, and the Kurds in Syria, and we say these people are not being represented by the government. And yet, if for 20 or 30 years prior to that, we were twisting the arms of these various governments to be democratic, to have free and fair elections, even though we were trying to twist the results of those elections whenever they gave in and had and held elections. So the latest that we've seen, and I would say this is in the wake of Brexit in Europe, we've seen the State Department switch in their talking points to democratic institutions. So now we need to be very wary of their concern about democratic institutions. And this here in the United States really plays out with these discussions about the roles of the federal government. Now, notice that they don't talk about the distinction between the natural powers of the states and the powers of commerce that are held by the federal government. They talk about the overreach and the authoritarianism of the executive branch, of that nobody listens to the legislative branch, or that the legislative branch has been hamstrung or has been bought out by APAC or by other corporations, or then they turn to the judiciary and that they might complain about the circuit federal judges not being listened to, whatever it may be. Regardless, that there is a complexity here that is not addressed, and the State Department loves to get people to peacefully protest, So in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, they've been very focused on peaceful protests. There was also, the color of color revolutions comes from the reality that physically where these plans exist inside the State Department are in a filing cabinet, and the files are color coded according to the various countries of the world. So that's where the color of color revolution comes from. And yet, sometime around the 2000s, the planners of these color revolutions began in their planning of it, began to adopt various colors for the revolutions. So when I see the yellow ribbons, the yellow ribbons that are being sported by the No Kings protesters, I think, oh gosh, this is straight out of the playbook from the State Department's Color Revolution Handbook. And you can also think about Desert Storm. Think about the yellow ribbons of Desert Storm. I can't remember what the color of the Nepali Revolution is. There's an Indonesia one now that the State Department is selling aqua and fuchsia ribbons around. You had the Orange Revolution, the Rose Revolution. I think it may have been blue at the Maidan coup in Ukraine. So people, especially whenever they are assembled into crowds and they are their attention is being directed to a complaint, they think in some very basic ways, and straight out of the playbook is this adoption of a color theme in order to identify the revolutionaries.
Interesting stuff. I was just trying to bring up something that would help support this, and actually found a Chinese report kind of discussing this kind of stuff. So this isn't something that I've had a chance to extensively look into, but as far as bringing it into what's going on in the United States, so if the CIA and State Departments and various shadowy organizations within the government have done this, and there's pretty strong evidence of this occurring, so I don't think that's a question. That if this is happening here in the United States, that it would look like what it does. So I want to go back to that part because I'm not sure if I fully get this straight. Why we would think that this is happening in the United States, other than just to say if the machinery exists, then it can be done elsewhere. It could be done here. Do we have any direct evidence of that, or are there telltale signs? Are there markers that would help us to identify that this was indeed the case? Are there certain things in the playbooks that strike you as being analogous, or the types of things that we would have seen in Syria or in China or in other places that would give us a sense that this is actually what's occurring? Is this being reported on by various media outlets, or help me have a better sense of why we might think that the No Kings protest isn't a genuine protest?
Again, I'm not saying that it's not a genuine protest, but one, there's the coordination of the events around the United States. Uh, that is that doesn't seem very that to me seems coordinated. So one, there's a level of coordination there that should begin to that should call our attention to that level of coordination. Then whenever again you begin to lay out the logic behind it, and you see that there is an outsized concern for democracy and democratic institutions, and that's exactly what the whole idea about the No Kings is calling into question. The American system of government, and it's placing more focus on democracy than republic, and more focus on a federal democracy rather than the true balance of powers between the state and states and the federal government. So that you have academic institutions, the cathedral, to use Curtis Yarvin's word, the both journalists and academic institutions that are buying into that and they're not questioning that, should tell you that it's not natural. And then again, go to No Kings. I would say, like, more broadly, I found it very ironic that we have this discussion of No Kings, and yet this isn't a 99% march that's against corporations. Because 99%, I believe, was more so monitored by the United States than used by the United States. If it had been used by the United States, they would have tried to turn it. And when I say they, I would say the power the powerful relationship between the corporations, who've bought off politicians through contributions to their campaigns, um, and bureaucrats who are part of that system. um, I don't see that here. I see instead this very facile understanding of the United States.
You're speaking of Occupy Wall Street, I think, is the one that is one that comes to my mind. Is that the one that you were referencing, or was this
Yes.
another one? Okay, because
No. No.
this
Yeah.
one seemed very genuine as well, like a reaction against, I believe, what was happening in 2008, kind of the whole crash that occurred, and then saying, these guys got bailed out. It also felt like the same kind of a thing that inspired Bitcoin, or at least that's what was in the Genesis block, is to say there was another bailout for the banks, that this is what continuously occurs, is the rich keep getting richer, the fat cats keep getting bailed out whenever they make these outsized bets and lose their shirt, that this was a reaction against that kind of a thing that occurred in roughly after that time frame of the policies that were put in place. That said, we've got to save these banks, otherwise the entire system is going to collapse. And many said, bring that on. Like, the collapse of that system would actually benefit the common man. And in many ways, what we've seen play out over the next 15 years after this was the consolidation of wealth and power into the hands of fewer and fewer individuals. So you're saying, if we were to compare Occupy Wall Street to No Kings, they look completely different. Occupy Wall Street maybe had more chaos, more genuine grassroots kind of look to it, and No Kings looks way too organized and focused on words and phraseology that have been used by the CIA and the State Department in other countries to foment revolutions that the US could control.
Well, and also think about the Occupy Wall Street went on for years, and there were people who moved into the parks downtown. I also look at Antifa and I say Occupy Wall Street was infiltrated, and the violence again. What are the tools that the State Department uses to control opposition in other countries? You find a group like Occupy Wall Street, you foment the violence on some of them. It drives out the mediocre, the other people. They go home, they go back to their apartment or their ranch style house in the suburbs. They don't show back up. And so and then you call out these more mediocre people for the No Kings rally. But it's just a press, it's just food for the cathedral. It's food for the journalists to report on, and the academics to turn around and say, oh gosh, there was a big movement against the Trump administration here in the United States. And all of a sudden you begin to feed feed this loop between the media, between it but it's not as if the No Kings protesters, if I were to believe more in their cause or their dedication to their cause, I would have seen tents that were put up downtown, or people who were doing more than showing up for a 15-minute march all across these cities in America, and then saying,
Oh,
well,
this looks more like a photo op. We're going to come out for 15 minutes and do something. It's a photo op. It's a way to stoke the media apparatus rather than to have a genuine, concerted, we're going to just sit here until, something changes. And that's the difference. That Occupy Wall Street was more genuine. People were more committed. They were willing to camp out for the rest of their natural lives to try to have something change. I don't think Occupy Wall Street really did it accomplish its goals? I'm not sure that it did.
Mm, I mean, very, very. That's a whole nother conversation. Uh, I think Occupy Wall Street brought a lot of attention to the financial industry. It began to raise awareness about the accepted economic tropes. It began to question politicians. I think it had a massive impact on American society. And I think it was because of that impact that we have seen again the government try to twist. And I say the government, the government is very complex there, but there are entities who are concerned about quote unquote keeping the peace within our borders, keeping the peace outside of the borders, whatever they determine that to be. But they have we seen the like of Occupy Wall Street occur in it, since 2011, 2012? No. And yet were there changes to the system? Were there systematic changes to the system to address their concerns? No. So what happened there? And then if we turn around and we look at the if we look at the No Kings rally and look at the difference between them, what is going on here? And so again, I think that we have the finger of and I mean add to that context the moves that the Trump administration has been making with regards to the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Security Council, the CIA, from the Russiagate hoax, and more broadly, the conflict that is occurring between various camps inside the federal government in Washington, D.C., with regards to what the United States foreign policy is, as we have a looming national debt and we have an administration that is fundamentally trying to change how the commerce, the commercial relationship between the United States and the other countries of the world is, then there is certainly something going on here. I don't know. I don't know that we are going to understand those relationships until the future. But it's just to me obvious that this is very different. And again, the irony of No Kings, as we begin to look at the relationship between who Occupy Wall Street was complaining about, which was the financial sector of the United States, and maybe they didn't understand the relationship, the grooming that Barack Obama had received from the financial sector, and the banking sector that traces its roots back to the City of London. You know, whenever I see this No Kings rally and that's targeted at Donald Trump rather than King Charles in England, King Charles III. And I think also about Donald Trump's recent visit to King Charles, and that having to be about the taxes that American companies are paying to Britain. And then I think about, or I look at the peace summit that was held in Egypt recently, and the very calculated the very calculated embarrassment that Donald Trump laid on Keir Starmer, the current Prime Minister of the UK, then I have to wonder, if we also begin to understand the depth of the relationship between members of the intelligence and bureaucratic diplomatic core of the United States and Britain. But I have to wonder, are we beginning to get a real close to home with the actions that Donald Trump is taking in separating the United States interests from the interests of Great Britain and the financial empire that's headquartered in London? And I think that's the closer to the truth of what's going on here.
Food for thought. Very interesting take on No Kings. It's been a minute since I've really thought about Occupy Wall Street, so it's definitely giving me something to think about with how that played out, and maybe doing a bit of research on that. Maybe that's food for another episode. But I think we're out of time here. Great discussion, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.